given all the incredible insight that has been set forth tonight, and I really want to thank the panel, Gerard, Pat, James, and Ronaldo. Your insights were really, really interesting from my perspective to hear and take in. And I think that you'll see when you look at how we made our decision, many of the themes that have been talked about have come up in different shapes or forms. So how did we make this decision? One of the first things that we have to look at, and we do on a regular basis in dealing with art, which is at times inherently controversial, provocative, challenging, difficult, and confrontational, is what is the real evidence, the empirical evidence, that supports some of the claims that music like this, or really other forms of art, create the kinds of harms that certain people ascribe to this music, and in particular 50 Cent. And so, unfortunately, there is only so much help that empirical evidence is often the case with very complex social issues can provide. But really, what the empirical evidence would suggest is that this is not something that we can really understand entirely simply by reference to empirical analysis. But from a decision point of view, it certainly suggests that there is no compelling reason why we should not be working with an artist like 50 Cent. And so really what I'm saying here is that if there was some very strong, compelling evidence, if you could show me that 50 Cent as an artist was directly related to the kinds of concerns that we've been expressed here this evening, we would be having a different conversation. But that's only one small piece of the decision calculus. The next thing that we looked at really was the likelihood of harm. Not in the grand societal superstructure sense that has been talked about thematically over the course of evening, but in the context of this particular event, about this particular context, this particular event in Toronto. What is the likelihood for harm? And on our analysis of that situation, the likelihood for harm is very small. What kinds of harms we really could be considering? Well, the harms that the politicians were most concerned about, riots at the concert, goes to reinforce really how much of this market is really understood. Working with the City of Toronto and police, the amount of security that was present at this concert was absolutely unprecedented. There were 2 mounted divisions, at least 100 officers, another 100 officers in plain clothes, plus a riot squad, all on site, while, as Pat so eloquently pointed out, upper middle class kids were being dropped off by their parents in their Volvos coming in to see the 50 Cent concert. And quite frankly, if the politicians and the police put this much organizational care into preventing harm in this instance as they would to the substantive issues that lie behind what we're really talking about here, we probably would be seeing very different results. So from our perspective, having to look at this from an as informed educated participants in this, the likelihood of direct harm was very small. The next thing that we took into consideration was the degree to which we could actually have some influence here. As I mentioned, this concert was going to happen in any case. So this was not a yes or no question in terms of 50 Cent's performance in Toronto. This really was a question ultimately of corporate character for us. Because this, as I mentioned, this was going to happen anyways. And so on that basis, we decided that we would have much more positive influence by being involved in this kind of concert. See, our company actually is mostly well known for the brand of hip-hop that Ronaldo mentioned, which is called conscious hip-hop, which is hip-hop which is more steeped in political messages and messages of community. But of course, we are a business in the music industry, and we work with artists of all different kinds of styles and different messages. So in that case, we made a decision that we could actually be more helpful by choosing to get involved. Because the corollary of this, of course, is that had we not gotten involved, remember, we work in a very specialized industry, and there are very few countries in the world that have developed the special kind of expertise that we have, that know how to develop, execute successfully large-scale music events, which include the marketing and promotion of them. If we did not get involved, for certain one of our competitors that are out of the United States, and I should have reinforced this earlier, the cultural context here about hip-hop and the societal issues in Canada and the United States are distinctly different. And I can't reinforce that point more strongly. The audience composition of a hip-hop show in the United States is very different than the audience composition of a hip-hop show in Canada. And so many of the concerns or images or stereotypes that people often ascribe to the hip-hop audience really don't apply in Canada. The next issue that we thought about really had to do with this determining accountability and responsibility. Is it our role as a company involved in this metastructure of the music industry in this particular context to have to choose to be really what would amount to being an ethical hero in this circumstance by not working with 50 Cent in this particular time? And we decided that really it's unfortunate that ethics, if one would say that we should not have done this, would require us to put ourselves in a heroic circumstance. Heroic in the sense that we would have to incur economic loss. I would have to put employees of ours at conceptual risk and all the rest of it. Why are we the ones that have to pay the price for a much larger superstructure when we are really, in the context of all of this, a very, very small player in a much, much larger global music industry machinery? Then the issues of responsibility and accountability. Of course, I would never deny that there aren't societal problems, many of which could be linked to or reflective of this form of music. But in terms of whose decision it is to allow people to attend this show, for kids, that really is the role of the parent. And I can't reinforce that more strongly. And in fact, I brought to the show, she happens to be here this evening, my cousin Danielle, and with her mother's permission and blessing, of course, to attend the show. But I only reinforce this, that I don't think it's appropriate for us to decide whether or not kids should be at shows like this, and that responsibility, if we do have it, certainly is much farther down on the level than parents per se. And then, of course, I'm not getting into the discussion really in great detail about government or other kinds of regulatory bodies to have some influence here. So if we were to rank who actually has responsibility or accountability to actually have some influence, I would argue that our ranking is substantially low, such to the point that it is not responsible for me as an executive running a company to be taking the heroic standpoint and suffering economic consequence in that circumstance. I was also very concerned about the precedent that this would set. Precedent in so many ways. First of all, I was angered, very angered, by the response by the political community, particularly Dan Matteig, the MP, who wanted to ban 50 Cent from coming into the country. I mean, to really argue as a leader, a representative of the people, that such a short-sighted response to such a complex problem would actually have some kind of meaningful outcome. It's such an insult to the deeper societal issues that are really at play here that we almost felt that we had a responsibility to defend against this particular circumstance. And then also, as I think really well demonstrated in James's speech, principles of fairness and consistency were at issue here for us. I am a music scholar, among other things, and there are countless examples of other artists whose content is controversial, challenging, violent, and the other themes that we have talked about tonight, who never receive the kind of criticism or concern that 50 Cent did in this instance. Or at times they may have, and now we laugh at them. At one point, Elvis's music was supposed to be the music of the devil. The Rolling Stones, who are now the poster boys for the baby boomer rock generation, were at one time criminals and thugs, and were also subject to this particular kind of scrutiny. So when you go back and you look at music history, all the way, quite frankly, to Stravinsky's Rite of Strings in Paris, where there were fears of riots, and the same issue has been going on for literally hundreds, if not generations, thousands of years. So in that circumstance, I think just by the